I learned to smile while being erased. You can practice that kind of smile in mirrors for years and still not be ready for the moment it matters. Mine showed up on cue at Officers' Heritage Hall beneath 12-foot ceilings, regimental flags and a crystal chandelier bright enough to make every polished shoe and silver cufflink gleam. 200 people had been invited to celebrate my sister's engagement, though celebrate wasn't the right word. This was a rollout, a campaign launch with champagne towers. Sloane stood at the head table in ivory silk, one hand resting lightly on her fiancé's sleeve like she was accepting office. She had a string quartet in one corner, photographers in another, and our mother's probate attorney seated near the front where everyone could see him laugh at her jokes. Donors from the Veterans Museum sat with colonels. Old family friends mixed with junior officers who'd learned quickly whose name opened doors in this town. Mine did not. To most of them, I was the quiet daughter who moved home, the one who didn't really have a career anymore, the one who wore practical shoes because she spent nights helping our mother to the bathroom after hospice, stopped sending aides regularly. I had become background furniture in my own life, useful, silent, and easy to ignore. Sloane lifted her glass. The room softened. "To family," she said, smiling in that way she had, warm enough to pass, sharp enough to cut. "To loyalty, to showing up even when it's hard." People nodded. A few glanced at me and gave sympathetic smiles like I was a sweet cautionary tale. Then she tilted her glass toward me. "And to my sister Riley," she said. "The daughter who never achieved much, but at least she finally found a purpose." The laughter came in layers, quick little huffs from people who didn't want to be rude, full-throated from the men at the finance table. One woman covered her mouth as if that made complicity tasteful. I felt the insult hit center mass. Clean, deliberate, rehearsed. I smiled. Across the room, Daniel Mercer watched me over the rim of his water glass. Major Mercer now, though I had known him when he still measured himself by what others thought of him. He wasn't smiling. He also wasn't intervening, which was exactly right. Daniel knew me well enough to understand silence can be a weapon when everyone else is performing. Someone at my table leaned in. "She's just teasing. You know how Sloane is." I did know how Sloane was. I stood when the laughter tapered, one hand on the back of my chair, and let the room settle enough that Fawkes stopped moving. "Thank you, Sloane," I said. My voice came out even. "I appreciate your concern." A few guests smirked, waiting for me to prove I was the bitter sister. I kept my gaze on Sloane. For clarity, I'm not weak, I'm not dependent, and I'm not confused. I'm patient. The hall went still, in the odd way formal rooms do when people sense conflict but can't yet classify it as entertainment. Sloane's smile held, but only just. "Riley, this is an engagement dinner, not a deposition." "Then let's enjoy the evening," I said, and sat down. The quartet resumed as if someone had pressed play on civility. Daniel moved through the room an hour later and took the empty seat beside me while a board member droned on about legacy giving. "You counted," he murmured without looking at me. "Every witness," I said. He nodded once. "Good." Our mother had wanted peace, and for a long time I'd translated that as surrender. Keep the house calm. Let Sloane decide. Absorb the comments. De-escalate. I had become efficient at disappearing, efficient enough that even people who liked me could not describe me. But there is a line between peacekeeping and self-erasure. I had crossed it months ago and only realized it now beneath military portraits and donor applause, with my sister toasting my failure like it was a family tradition. When the dinner ended, Sloane kissed cheeks and accepted congratulations while photographers documented every angle of her life. I walked to the parking lot alone and stood under the yellow light by my car until the cold seeped through my coat. Daniel stopped beside me but didn't touch me. "She thinks optics are truth," he said. "She's not wrong," I answered. "Most days," he studied me. "What do you need?" I looked back at the hall doors where people were still filing out, laughing, carrying takeaway boxes with the event logo printed in gold. "Time," I said. "And paper." 2 days later, we buried our mother in rain. The service itself passed in a blur of umbrellas and wet collars and the smell of turned earth. I held the folded flag with both hands while the chaplain spoke about devotion and endurance, words that sounded noble until you remembered endurance often looks like one woman sleeping in a chair next to a hospital bed because there's no one else to rotate in. After the graveside prayer, everyone moved to the reception room at the cemetery. Coffee urns, sandwich trays, framed photos on easels. Sloane stood near the entrance in black wool and pearls, greeting mourners like a hostess at a club fundraiser. I saw the process server before he reached me. Cheap suit, legal envelope, cautious eyes. He asked my name anyway, as if there could be any mistake. When I said yes, he handed me the packet and retreated fast, relieved to have delivered his bad news to the right target. People noticed immediately. Conversations dipped, recovered, dipped again. In small towns, legal paper has a smell. I opened the first page and read the caption. Estate of Margaret Robinson. Petition for probate. Filed that morning. My mother's will, according to the petition, left everything to Sloane. Everything. House, accounts, personal effects, military survivor memorabilia, even the medal case I had cleaned and catalogued with my mother over 3 weekends while morphine made her hands shake. There was a clause, new to me, elegantly phrased, that said I had voluntarily abandoned filial duties and thereby forfeited any inheritance claim. Abandoned. I heard Sloane's voice before I looked up. "For everyone asking," she said, loud enough for the room, "Mom left everything to the daughter who stayed loyal." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Most did not. "She made her wishes clear," Sloane went on, eyes fixed on me with practiced sorrow. "I know grief makes people unpredictable, and I hope Riley will respect Mom's final decision instead of creating a spectacle." There it was. Accusation preloaded into sympathy. My aunt murmured, "Riley may be not here," as if I were the one making announcements in a reception hall 10 feet from the cookie table. I folded the papers once, precise and clean, and put them in my bag. "I'll respond through counsel," I said. Sloane gave a small, tragic nod for her audience. Of course. By nightfall, the locks at our mother's house were changed. I learned that from a neighbour who texted a blurry photo of 2 men in work jackets hauling boxes to the curb. When I drove over, my key turned uselessly in the front door, and my things sat outside in damp cardboard. Hospice journals, pharmacy logs, my mother's handwritten pain schedule, 2 framed photos, and a sweater that still smelled faintly of her lavender lotion. I stood on the porch with rain still in my hair and called Sloane once. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Same. A social media notification buzzed, then another, then 6 more. Sloane had posted a black and white photo of herself holding our mother's hand with the caption, "Honouring her final wishes is hard but necessary. Boundaries matter, even with family. Please respect our privacy." Comments bloomed beneath it. "Stay strong, Sloane. You did everything for her." Some people only show up when there's money. By midnight, I was the cautionary tale in 3 group chats and an unnamed villain in 2 prayer chains. I carried the hospice journals to my car, 1 box at a time. The cardboard softened under my fingers. Status quo wasn't just shattered, it had been replaced with a story where I was already cast and everyone had memorized their lines. If I did nothing, my mother's legacy would remain filed under a lie. If I fought, I would be framed as exactly what Sloane needed me to be. The next week taught me what social death feels like in polite circles. At memorial planning, Sloane removed me from the email list and then told relatives she had done it to reduce Riley's stress. At one legal intake meeting, she introduced me to a paralegal as my sister, who is emotionally unstable right now, but means well. The paralegal gave me the kind smile people reserve for children and concussion patients. Texts I had sent out of context appeared in the family chat. One where I wrote, "We need to discuss account transfers," became, "See, she's demanding money again." A message where I asked for copies of medication receipts became, "She's trying to build a case against me while Mum is barely gone." Every challenge I filed was reframed as harassment. The probate attorney who had once shaken my hand at holidays now kept his eyes on his notes when I spoke. At church, women who had accepted casseroles from me during my mother's chemo crossed the street when they saw me coming. A cousin from Tulsa posted, "Caregivers deserve compassion, but entitlement is ugly," then texted me separately, "I hope you're okay. Don't drag this out. Don't drag this out." As if facts were rude. As if grief had an acceptable timeline if you were losing correctly. At night, I spread documents across the dining table in Daniel's apartment, turning chaos into sequence. Hospice dates, pharmacy pickups, home care invoices, my mother's handwriting samples from before and after treatment, email timestamps, visitor logs from the assisted living respite week Sloan had begged for and then skipped. I built timelines the way I'd once built operational plans: objective, constraints, vulnerabilities, contingencies. Daniel made tea, stayed quiet, and read what I handed him. On the third night, he said, "You already know what this is." "Forgery?" I said. "Campaign," he corrected. "Legal filing plus narrative control." I leaned back and pressed my fingers to my eyes. If I accuse her without hard proof, I'm done. She'll call it grief paranoia, and everyone will believe her because it's cleaner. "Then don't accuse," he said. "Document." That was the part I could do. I requested ink aging review through counsel. I contacted hospice staff for affidavits about my mother's condition in the week the disputed will was supposedly signed. I drafted discovery motions narrow enough to survive objection and wide enough to catch metadata, printer logs, draft files, device sync histories. I asked for the sign-in records from the notary office listed on the filing. I moved like someone half my town did not recognize because half my town had never needed to. The risks sharpened as the paperwork did. If the filed will stood, I lost more than property. I lost my mother's journals, the archive of her care, the medals and letters that mapped my grandfather's service, the house where every doorway still held pencil marks of our heights. I lost legal standing to protect any of it. Sloan would have immediate authority to sell, discard, curate, and retell. I would become permanently the daughter who abandoned, not just in gossip, in court record. That mattered because records outlive people. Long after everyone forgot who said what at which reception, there would be stamped pages declaring my mother disinherited me for disloyalty. Future employers could find that. Security reviewers could find that. Any board, any agency, any person with search access could read a legal fiction and call it fact. And then there was Daniel. Our relationship had always lived behind careful lines. Years ago, in a role I was never allowed to discuss publicly, he had worked under me. Classification wrapped those years in silence so complete that even now in private life I could not defend myself with the simplest truth. I had not done nothing. I had done work that required invisibility, precision, and a tolerance for being misunderstood. The silence that protected missions now protected my sister's version of me. If this fight got uglier, and it would, Daniel's name would be pulled in. People would call him compromised, love-struck, manipulated by a grieving woman fighting for money. They would not imagine he stayed because he had watched me hold procedure under pressure better than almost anyone he had served with. One Friday afternoon, Sloan's attorney sent a settlement offer. For family harmony, it said, if I signed a full release, waiving all inheritance claims and agreeing not to contest executor authority, Sloan would consider returning a small number of sentimental items and refrain from seeking fees for frivolous litigation. Peace, purchased with silence. I read it twice, then forwarded it to my counsel with one line. Decline. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. "You should take this," Sloan said when I answered, as if we were discussing weather. "People are exhausted, Riley. You're making Mum's memory ugly." I stared at the binder open in front of me, at my mother's medication chart in blue ink and shaky numerals. "You filed a will that says I abandoned her." "If you hadn't disappeared for years, maybe no one would believe it," she said. "But they do. That's not my fault." My grip tightened on the phone. "Sign the release," she said softly. "You'll get your life back." Then she hung up. I sat there a long time with the deadline in my ear, and for the first time since the cemetery, I let myself feel the full architecture of what was at stake. Not money, not pride, reality. Who cared for our mother, who told the truth, who got written into history as dutiful and who as disposable? Those things were being decided in filings, in comments, in church hallways, and in silence. I had spent years being useful without recognition. I could survive insults. I could survive exile from people who preferred simple stories. What I could not survive and would not permit was a forged ending for the woman who raised us. I closed the binder, squared the stack, and opened a fresh legal pad. At the top of the page I wrote, in block letters, "Established chain of custody." Then I began. I started with the only thing that still obeyed me. Sequence. By 1 a.m, my legal pad had 6 columns: date, event, witness, document source, vulnerability, corroboration, and 3 pages of entries in block print. By 2, I had drafted an email to my attorney, Elena Park, attaching a preliminary chronology and asking for 2 emergency filings at open, preservation order for all estate-related records, and a temporary restraint on disposal of personal property pending authenticity review of the will. At 7:58 a.m., Eleanor called before I finished coffee. "You slept?" she asked. "Not materially." "That tracks." Papers rustled on her end. "Your timeline is better than half of what I get from paid investigators. I can file this, but, Riley, once we ask for forensic preservation, you're declaring war." "She already declared it," I said. "I'm just notifying the court." By noon, we had motions on file. By 3, Sloane's counsel had responded with opposition, calling me emotionally reactive and motivated by long-standing sibling resentment. I read the language on my phone outside the courthouse and laughed once, not because it was funny, but because it was efficient. They were building the same image in every venue: unstable, jealous, fixated. Inside, the deputy clerk stamped our pleadings without expression. When she slid the copies back to me, she looked at the name on the caption, then up at me, then away in the practiced way of someone trying not to be seen, recognizing scandal. That night, Daniel came in from a late briefing and found me cross-referencing hospice medication logs against the signature date on the filed will. "You're indexing dosage windows," he said. "If the signature was made between 1400 and 1600, she'd had breakthrough morphine at 1325. Her hand was shaking so hard she dropped a spoon. Who can testify to that? Nurse Marisol. Maybe aid rotation if they'll talk." He nodded, then sat across from me, reading quietly while I worked. We had our own rhythm in crisis. No speeches, no false reassurance, no "it'll all work out," just tasks. Over the next 6 days, I learned exactly how much social pressure can bend memory. Marisol Vega, Hospice RN, met me in the back corner of a diner off Route 8 before her shift. She wrapped both hands around her mug and said, "Your mother asked for you every med check. Everyone. You were there." Then she lowered her voice. "If someone says you abandon her, they are lying." "Would you sign that?" I asked. She hesitated only long enough to look toward the window. "Yes." A second hospice worker agreed by phone, then texted 12 hours later that she was not comfortable being in the middle of family legal matters. A church friend who had promised to verify my overnight care schedule stopped answering after Sloane tagged her in a memorial post. A cousin who had offered bank transfer screenshots called crying and asked me never to mention her name. None of it surprised me anymore. Fear is contagious in polite communities. What did surprise me was the notary trail. The will Sloane filed listed a notary office near the riverfront as location of execution. Eleanor subpoenaed their appointment logs. No record of my mother that day. No walk-in entry under Margaret Robinson. No transaction fee. When pushed, the office manager produced a statement that one of their commissioned notaries had been on leave that week, caring for his father in Ohio. The signature block on the will still carried his stamp. Elena looked up from the statement and gave me the first real smile I had seen on her in days. "That," she said, tapping the page, "is not a family misunderstanding." We moved for targeted discovery. Imaging of Sloane's home office computer, printer spool logs, and cloud backup entries tied to draft estate documents. Opposing counsel objected as invasive and disproportionate. We narrowed scope, then narrowed again. I wrote the technical appendix myself, specifying device identifiers and date windows so tight a judge could grant without feeling reckless. At the status conference, Sloane arrived in charcoal with a tissue folded in one hand and a Bible tucked under her arm. She didn't look at me. She looked just past me, the way people do when they're portraying compassion to an audience. When her attorney spoke, he was all concern. "My client is trying to grieve," he told the court. "Ms. Robinson's filings are escalating conflict and re-traumatizing the family." I stood when Elena signaled and spoke only when addressed. "The requested discovery," I said, "is limited to validating execution history of the filed instrument. If authentic, the data will support it. If not, the court deserves to know quickly before irreversible asset transfers." The judge watched me for a long second, then granted partial preservation pending a fuller hearing. No deletions, no device replacement, no sale of disputed personal property. It wasn't victory. It was oxygen. Sloane's face didn't move until we were in the hallway. Then she leaned close enough that only I could hear. "You really want strangers digging through my house?" she whispered. "For what? So you can feel important." I held her gaze. For chain of custody. She gave me a brittle smile. You always did need rules to feel safe. No, I said. I need facts to survive liars. She walked away before I could see whether the line landed. By the end of that week, I had built what Eleanor called a prosecutable spine. Medication timeline, witness affidavit, notary inconsistency, preservation order, and pending metadata request. None of it proved forgery on its own. Together, it made the story harder to keep clean, which is when Sloane intensified the dirtier part. She started referring to me publicly as my sister who is struggling. She sent family updates that sounded charitable and poisonous at once. Please pray for Riley's peace as she works through unresolved issues. At a Veterans Auxiliary luncheon, she told 2 women I had become fixated on legal control and might be having a breakdown. By dinner, I had 3 texts suggesting I seek counselling before this ruins your future. I screenshotted everything and dropped each item into an evidence folder titled Narrative Campaign. I didn't answer a single one. Pressure works best when it arrives from all directions. The first crack was money. Litigation is a furnace, and my savings had already taken a hit during my mother's care year. Eleanor reduced her rate where she could, but subpoenas, forensic consults, transcript fees, none of it cared about principle. Sloane knew that. Sloane. 2 days after the partial preservation order, her attorney served a motion for protective costs, asking the court to require me to post a bond before any device imaging could proceed. Translation: pay to prove you're not being defamed by a forgery. The second crack was access. Even with the no-sale order, I still couldn't get into my mother's house. Sloane's team argued I had removed all personal effects already. Photographs of my boxed journals on the curb said otherwise, but until a specific retrieval protocol was entered, the locks stayed changed. The house sat lit at night, occupied by cleaners and appraisers I did not authorize, while I drove past and wrote down license plates like a stranger surveilling my own childhood. The third crack was witness interference so subtle it could almost be denied. Marisol called me at 9:12 p.m., voice tight. Someone from your sister's side contacted hospice administration, asking if I'm credentialed to opine on testamentary capacity. They copied my supervisor. Did you tell Elena? I asked. Just now. A pause. I'm still willing to testify, but they're trying to scare people. I know. 2 days later, the retired neighbour who had agreed to verify that I was at the house nightly during the alleged abandonment period emailed a single sentence. I'm withdrawing. This has become too contentious for me. Attached was a screenshot of a community forum thread where someone, anonymous but not imaginative, called me the daughter leveraging military connections to steal from her own family. Military connections, if only they understood how little I could legally say. At church that Sunday, Pastor Glenn intercepted me in the vestibule with both palms up in a peacemaker posture. Riley, he said gently, there's concern this legal battle is becoming vindictive. Based on what evidence? Perception matters. There it was again. Optics over fact, as if perception deserved equal weight with documents filed under penalty of perjury. Then perception can sit beside exhibits, I said. I'm done negotiating with rumours. He looked saddened in the way people do when you refuse the role they assigned you. The hearing on expanded discovery went worse than I expected. Sloane's counsel arrived with a digital slideshow. Family photos, caregiving calendars she had never shown before, excerpts from my messages stripped to fragments. He argued that forensic imaging of her devices would expose privileged communications and private data unrelated to probate. He called my requests a fishing expedition fueled by emotional grievance. Eleanor countered with the notary discrepancy and preservation necessity. I testified briefly to foundation and scope. I stayed calm. I was specific. I did not rise to provocation. The judge granted us access, but delayed full imaging until a special master could be appointed and protocols set. More delay, more cost, more room for contamination. On the courthouse steps, Sloane cried into a handkerchief while her friend filmed from a careful angle. By evening, a clip circulated. Her saying, voice breaking, I just want to honour Mom without being attacked. No mention of forged notary stamps. No mention of disinheritance language. Just tears, edited for sympathy. Daniel watched the clip once, then set his phone face down. She's running an influence op, he said. I know. You're still fighting in documents. She's fighting in people. I can't outlie her. He met my eyes. No, but you can outlast her. The next morning brought a second settlement offer, harder this time, less polite. If I signed a global release in 72 hours, Sloane would allow retrieval of pre-approved sentimental belongings supervised by her representative. If I refused, they would seek sanctions for bad faith litigation and petition to restrict my contact with estate vendors and witnesses. Eleanor called it what it was, coercive paper in a legal font. I almost threw it away. Instead, I added it to the binder. By Tuesday, exhaustion had narrowed my world to checklists and caffeine. I was at Eleanor's office reviewing a draft motion to compel when the receptionist knocked lightly and said, "There's a courier here for Ms. Riley Robinson. Government delivery. He says it requires in-person verification." I looked at Elena. She looked at me. "Expecting anything federal?" she asked. "No." In the lobby stood a uniformed army courier with a locked transfer case and a clipboard. Mid-30s, neutral expression, all procedure. "Ms. Robinson?" he asked. "Yes." He checked my ID, then compared it to a printed authorization sheet with red block text. "Delivery is restricted. Addressee only. Signature required on receipt and chain acknowledgement." The label on the case read, "Department of the Army, Legal Assistance Division. Posthumous release packet. Authorized recipient, Riley A. Robinson. Do not open except by addressee or counsel in addressee presence." For a second, the room dropped away, the carpet, the fluorescent lights, the receptionist pretending not to stare. Posthumous. I signed. The courier released the latch, withdrew a sealed document envelope, and had me initial across tamper tape before he departed without a word beyond protocol closeout. Eleanor shut her office door behind us. "Do you want Daniel here?" she asked. I stared at the army seal. Yes. Daniel arrived in 12 minutes, still in uniform, rein on his shoulders. He didn't ask questions until he saw the label. Then he went very still. "You got this from Army Legal Assistance?" he asked. "Hand-delivered," Eleanor said. "Logged." I broke the seal with my thumb under the flap, careful not to tear through any signature lines. Inside were 3 bundles, each banded and indexed. Bundle 1, Cover Memorandum and Release Authority. Bundle 2, Sworn Statement, Margaret Robinson. Bundle 3, Testamentary Instruments and Chain of Custody Exhibits. The cover memorandum was on Army legal letterhead from a Regional Installation Legal Assistance Office, dated 8 months earlier. It stated that Margaret Robinson had appeared in person, established capacity to execute testamentary documents, and requested secured military custodial holding with delayed posthumous delivery to me, Riley A. Robinson, in the event of contested probate or suspected tampering. I read the sentence twice to make sure I hadn't manufactured it out of need. Contested probate or suspected tampering. Eleanor took the memo from me and scanned down fast, lawyer fast. "This is gold-plated," she said quietly. "Witnessed by a JAG captain and a retired command sergeant major, notarized on base, entry logs and seal numbers attached." My hands were shaking when I opened Bundle 2. My mother's sworn statement ran 6 pages, each initialed in blue ink I recognized immediately from her better days. In it, she described Sloane pressuring her repeatedly to simplify the estate, presenting draft language that would give Sloane sole control, and becoming angry when my mother refused to disinherit me. She stated plainly that she feared documents in the home could be altered and that she did not trust private storage. Then, halfway down page 4, my chest tightened so hard I had to put the paper down. I affirm my younger daughter, Riley Robinson, has not abandoned me. She is my daily caregiver and primary support. Any document claiming abandonment is false. Daniel reached for my wrist, not the papers. Just enough contact to ground me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded once because speaking would have broken me open in the wrong way. Bundle 3 contained the certified duplicate will, executed after the one Sloane filed and fully valid on its face. Both daughters included as beneficiaries, specific bequests itemized, memorial archive preserved, home retained for structured disposition, and fiduciary authority assigned to me as executor with oversight provisions that made abuse difficult. Not punitive, not sentimental, just careful, exactly like her. Behind it sat chain of custody documents so meticulous they read like an operations log: intake IDs, evidence envelope serial numbers, custody transfers, vault access timestamps, and release triggers. There was even a sealed envelope photo sheet showing tamper tape intact at each stage. Eleanor exhaled slowly. This doesn't just beat their will. This reframes the whole case as intentional fraud. At the very back was a handwritten note in my mother's script, folded once. Riley, if you are reading this, then what I feared has happened. I used Army Legal because papers at home are not safe, and because I knew you would understand secure procedures, even if no one else ever understood your life. You were never absent. You were my strength when my body failed me. Do not trade truth for peace. Love, Mum. I pressed the note to my mouth and let myself cry once, soundless and brief. Then I set it flat, smoothed the fold, and went back to work. The shift inside me was immediate and total. Until that moment, I had been defending against an accusation. Narrow posture, containment, survive the smear, salvage what I could. Now the battlefield changed. This was no longer daughter versus daughter optics. This was forged probate filing against certified military chain of custody, sworn witness records, and evidence of coercion. The goal was no longer don't lose everything. The goal was exposure, complete, documented, and irreversible. Eleanor was already drafting in her head. We amend pleadings today. Petition to invalidate filed will, admit Army certified instrument, emergency suspension of Sloan's authority, sanctions request, and referral language for criminal review. Add protective order for remaining records, I said, and immediate retrieval of hospice journals and medal archive. She nodded. Done. Daniel spoke for the first time in several minutes. And I file a declaration. I looked at him. Dan, no, he said, calm but absolute. She built this lie around your silence. I can't disclose classified operations, but I can state what is releasable. I served under you. You held command-level planning authority. Your non-disclosure obligations limited public employment narrative for years. Did nothing is demonstrably false. Eleanor raised a cautionary finger. We'll need to scrub language through security review. Already know the process, he said. I should have argued. I should have protected him from the blowback that would follow once he stepped into the record. Instead, I heard my mother's line again, do not trade truth for peace, and recognized the same choice in front of us. Okay, I said. We do it clean. By late afternoon, our filing package had tripled in size and sharpened in tone. Exhibits were tabbed, affidavits cross-referenced, relief requested in escalating order, immediate, interim, final. We attached the Army memo under seal with motion for judicial notice of chain of custody authenticity pending live testimony. At 5:42 p.m., Eleanor hit submit on the emergency e-file. At 6:03 p.m., my phone exploded. Unknown numbers, cousins, 2 reporters I had never spoken to. A board member from the Veterans Museum asking if rumours about military documents were true. Someone had already tipped that something significant landed. For once, I didn't feel hunted by the noise. I felt positioned. I answered only one call, Sloan's. She didn't bother with hello. What did you file? She demanded. The truth, I said. Silence. Then, sharp. You are trying to destroy me. No, I replied. You did the destructive part when you forged Mom's wishes. You can't prove that. I looked down at the Army seal impression on the cover memo, still visible through the protective sleeve. Watch me, I said, and ended the call. I ended the call and turned back toward Elena's office just as her assistant opened the door with a face I had already learned to read. Emergency filing from opposing counsel, she said. Marked expedited review. Eleanor took the printed notice, scanned 3 lines, and swore under her breath. What? I asked. She handed it to me. Verified petition for protective sanctions, evidentiary exclusion, and referral for federal investigation. Sloan's new theory was audacious and specific. I had allegedly used undisclosed military contacts to obtain or fabricate posthumous legal documents, manipulated chain of custody records, and pressured a vulnerable dying parent through authority imbalance. She attached my old social media photos in uniform-adjacent settings, Daniel's pending declaration, and a screenshot of a discussion thread claiming I had access to systems civilians can't audit. No proof, just architecture. But architecture matters when judges are tired and scandal looks plausible. She's trying to flip burden, Elena said, already pulling up her laptop. If she can make authenticity look compromised, court may freeze the army packet pending federal verification. Can she do that? She can ask, and she did. Eleanor jabbed the page. She's also asking for a gag order and a temporary bar preventing you from contacting any hospice or estate witnesses outside counsel, meaning I could still fight but blindfolded. My phone buzzed again and again. I silenced it, then checked anyway because that is what panic does. 2 reporters had found my private email. One subject line read, "Did you falsify military estate documents?" Another, "Comment requested before publication." By 7:30, local feeds were full of careful poison. A legal influencer account reposted the courthouse docket with the caption, "Explosive allegation in Robinson probate war," was sealed army letter staged. Someone clipped Daniel's image from a veterans fundraiser and wrote, "Officer boyfriend enters case after secret relationship history." I stared at the screen long enough for my reflection to ghost over the words. This was what Sloane did best. She didn't need to prove anything. She only needed to introduce enough smoke that everyone asked whether fire might be understandable. At 8:12 p.m., Daniel's phone rang from his command line. He answered, listened, said "Understood, sir," and ended the call with his jaw set hard. They received a congressional inquiry forwarded from district staff, he said, about potential misuse of military legal channels in a civilian inheritance dispute. She'd gone political. Eleanor looked up sharply. From who? Anonymous constituent complaint with attached media links. He gave a humorless breath. Amazing timing. The stakes expanded in a single minute. If a federal review is triggered even informally, the probate judge could delay admission of the army packet indefinitely. Months, maybe longer. Long enough for narratives to calcify and evidence to decay. Long enough for my mother's real will to become controversial. We worked until after midnight, drafting opposition, certification process, delivery protocol, seals, witness identifiers, statutory grounds for admissibility. Eleanor requested emergency in-camera review by the judge and offered immediate production of originals under court supervision. At 12:41 a.m., we e-filed. At 1:03, another blow landed. Marisol texted, "I got served at home with a warning letter from Hospice Council. They say testimony beyond records could violate policy. I'm scared. I called her immediately. Straight to voicemail, I called again. Same." I typed, "You're not alone. Eleanor will contact your counsel in the morning. Don't speak to anyone else tonight." No reply. I drove home through empty streets with Daniel behind me, taillights red in my rearview like a pulse. At a stoplight, my phone lit up with a photo message from an unknown number. It was my mother's cedar hope chest in the garage. Lid open, contents disordered, timestamped that evening. Sign the release, and this stops. No signature. None needed. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles went pale and told myself to breathe in counts of 4. If Sloane succeeded now, this was what I would lose. Not just estate control, not just legal standing, but the credibility of the only evidence that could clear my mother's name and mine. The forged will would survive not because it was true, but because truth would be procedurally quarantined. By 2:30, I had backed up every file in triplicate and slept 47 minutes on top of my bedspread. At 6:05 a.m., we were in court for the emergency session she forced. Sloane arrived 10 minutes later in navy, with no tears this time. Only a composed face and a new attorney beside her, white shoe litigator from the city, the kind people hire when they want to signal they are not negotiating. She did not look at me. She didn't need to. She had escalated from humiliating me to contaminating evidence itself, and suddenly everything I had built sat on a knife edge called admissibility. Emergency hearings are mostly momentum and framing. Whoever tells the cleaner first story wins the first hour. Sloane's new counsel told it smoothly. "Your Honour, we are not here to relitigate sibling conflict." he began. "We are here to prevent tainted materials from poisoning this court. The purported army packets surfaced only after aggressive discovery pressure. We request temporary exclusion pending federal authentication and sanctions for weaponizing unverified government documents." Weaponizing. Unverified. Elena countered with chain logs, courier identity, and secured release protocol. She asked the court to review originals immediately in chambers and denied delay tactics. The judge listened, expression flat, then asked one question that chilled me. "Can either side present live testimony today from the Army legal officer who executed custodial intake?" "No, not today. We had records, we had signatures, we had IDs, but live testimony required notice and coordination. Procedure, the thing I trusted, had a speed limit." The ruling came in careful language that still hit like a fracture. Pending authentication hearing, the court would provisionally seal the army packet, permit no public characterization of its contents by either side, appoint a neutral estate administrator for interim control, and suspend both daughters' unilateral access to disputed property. Not exclusion, not victory. Limbo, and limbo was loss. Outside the courtroom, the headline became instant: "Judge seals explosive army documents in Robinson estate fight." People read sealed as suspect. They always do. By afternoon, the real damage spread through channels that don't care about legal nuance. A museum board member emailed to postpone my mother's planned memorial exhibit until uncertainties resolve. 2 hospice volunteers who had agreed to affidavits withdrew to avoid controversy. The woman managing my mother's church meal train archive told me she couldn't release private logs while litigation was contentious. Then Eleanor called at 4:17 with a voice stripped of all padding. "Riley, Special Master just filed preliminary note from device inspection." Okay. Sloane's primary Home Office desktop was factory reset at 6:11 p.m. yesterday. I sat down on Daniel's kitchen floor without deciding to. "What?" "Timestamp aligns with 1 minute after our amended filings were served," she said, "and before the inspection lock notice physically reached her residence. So recover it. Secure overwrite protocol, not a normal reset. Deep wipe. Forensic lab says probability of complete recovery is low." Low is lawyer for almost none. The draft file we believed existed, the post-death will template, metadata trail, printer history, might be gone. Not hidden. Gone. I pressed my forehead to my knees. "Does the court treat that as spoliation?" "We'll move for adverse inference," Elena said. "But inference is not file content. We lost direct proof." I closed my eyes and saw the 6-column legal pad from nights ago. Every box aligned toward a clean evidentiary strike, and now the center lane had collapsed because someone hit delete at the right minute. As if that weren't enough, an hour later the neutral administrator reported that an initial inventory at the house could not locate 3 items listed in my mother's memorandum of sentimental property: my grandfather's bronze star case, a lockbox of service letters, and the original hospice journals that had been boxed on the curb. "Maybe miscatalogued," the administrator wrote. "Maybe stolen," I thought. I drove to the church parking lot because it was the only place I could sit without being watched and let the ugly truth settle. Some losses would not be reversible even if I won in court. You cannot unwipe a drive with certainty. You cannot always recover objects once moved through private hands. You cannot cross-examine what no longer exists. When Daniel found me, I was in the front seat with the engine off and both hands flat on the steering wheel like I was still trying to steer impact. He opened the passenger door, sat down, and waited. "I did everything right," I said finally, hating how small my voice sounded. "Preservation, scope limits, time-stamped requests. I did it right." "I know. And it still disappeared." He nodded once. "Yes." I laughed, a short, cracked sound. "Do you know what's insane? I can handle people hating me. I can handle being called greedy, unstable, whatever they need. But I can't handle Mum's journals missing. Those were her days. Her pain scores. Her stupid little notes about birds at the feeder. That's not evidence, Dan. That's her." My throat closed on the last word. He reached over and took my hand, and for a minute I let the tears come without apology. When they stopped, I wiped my face with the heel of my palm and looked straight ahead at the dark sanctuary windows. What if this is where it turns? I said. What if I did all this and the court just can't get there? What if truth is technically true and still loses? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then we make the record as complete as possible, he said, and we force every missing piece to have a timestamp and a responsible party. Not hope, procedure. It helped, but only a little. That night, I slept in fragments and woke at 3:09 to the certainty that I might lose things I could never list on a damages form. Earlier that same day, while Riley was absorbing the emergency hearing fallout, Daniel was fighting a parallel collapse of his own. Daniel sat in his car in the base parking garage with the engine off and his palms damp on the steering wheel, reading the same email for the 4th time. Effective immediately, you are relieved pending command inquiry into potential conflict of interest conduct and inappropriate influence in civilian legal proceedings. Surrender access credentials by 0900. He had known it might come. He had still not prepared for the physical sensation of it, the drop under the ribs, the hot flush behind the ears, the old instinct to stand straighter and deny pain until paperwork cleared it. He stared at the concrete pillar in front of him and thought, not for the first time, that institutions only sound impersonal until your name is in the subject line. He called Riley and hung up before it connected. He could not be another fire in her lap before dawn. Inside his office, he cleared his desk into 2 banker boxes, while a captain from personnel watched with polite discomfort. Standard protocol. No accusations spoken aloud, just access revoked, badge collected, systems locked. At 8:43, his former commander, now a brigadier, closed the door and said quietly, "Daniel, off the record, you may be right, but right doesn't stop process." Daniel gave a tight nod. "Understood, sir." "Do you?" The general's eyes softened for half a second. "You've built 20 years on clean judgment. Don't let this become martyrdom." Martyrdom. The word caught, because underneath the controlled answers, fear was blooming in places Daniel usually kept reinforced. He feared losing the career that had taught him who he was when nothing else made sense. He feared that by stepping forward for Riley, he had handed her enemies a fresh weapon, with his rank stamped on it. He feared, with a shame that felt adolescent and sharp, that part of him still needed to be seen as honourable by men who would never sit in a probate courtroom and watch truth get edited for optics. By noon, he was in civilian clothes at his apartment table, legal pads spread out, trying to draft his declaration revisions to survive review. Every sentence felt like threading a needle through barbed wire. Enough detail to matter, not enough to breach classification. Enough personal context to humanize Riley, not enough to make them look entangled by history in ways courts distrust. He deleted more than he kept. At 2:17, Riley came in with takeout she hadn't eaten, set it down, and saw his boxed insignia on the chair. She went still. "They pulled you?" He nodded. Her face changed. Anger first, then guilt so fast he hated himself for recognizing it. "Dan, I'm sorry. I should have told you not to file—" "No." His voice cracked harder than he expected. He sat back and rubbed both hands over his face. "Don't do that. Don't protect me from my own choice." She sat across from him, silent. For a long moment he looked at the table and let himself say what he usually edited out. "When I was 26, he said, "I stayed quiet in an inquiry because a senior officer told me it was better for the unit. Better for morale, better for careers. A convoy report got softened. A family got language instead of truth." He swallowed. "No one went to prison. Everyone got promoted. I learned how easy it is to survive by saying less." Riley didn't move. "I've lived with that," he said. "So when your sister built a lie out of your silence, I wasn't going to do it again. Even if this costs me." His eyes burned and he looked away, embarrassed by it and too tired to hide it. "I'm not steady because I'm fearless," he said quietly. "I'm steady because I know what it costs when I'm not." Riley reached across the table and took his hand. He let her, and for the first time in days he stopped pretending the hits were glancing. They weren't. They were landing on bone. By early evening, with his insignia still boxed beside the table, he was back at Riley's side when Elena called them into the office. At 5:26 p.m, Elena texted, "Need both of you in office now. New filing just dropped." We were there by 5:49. She didn't make us sit. Sloane filed motion to strike Daniel's declaration entirely, she said, handing over a stack. Conflict, bias, alleged chain of command coercion. Expected, but that's not the problem. She slid another exhibit across the table. Affidavit of retired Command Sergeant Major Harlan Pike, the second witness listed on my mother's army intake. My stomach turned before I finished paragraph 2. Pike now claimed he had limited recollection of the execution meeting, did not remember reviewing full contents of attached testamentary document, and believed Margaret Robinson appeared fatigued and possibly confused. He further stated that he may have signed witness acknowledgement in reliance on JAG staff representations without independent verification. It was crafted to do maximum damage with minimum perjury, not a full recantation, just enough uncertainty to fracture confidence. "Elena," I said, voice thin, "is this real?" "Signature appears real. We're verifying notarization now." She looked furious in that efficient way lawyers do. "If admissible, it gives the judge cover to treat army chain as contested fact requiring live testimony before admission." "And Captain Ellis?" Daniel asked, naming the JAG officer from the packet. "Temporary duty reassignment as of this morning," Elena said. "Out of state. We requested remote appearance. No confirmation yet." Of course. Sloane's final move was obvious now. Muddy one witness, delay the other, strike Daniel, keep the army packet sealed, and force the case back onto optics and partial inferences. If she could get through the next hearing without full authentication on record, she could keep bleeding us with delay until resources, witnesses, or nerve gave out. My phone rang. Unknown number from the county district office. I answered on speaker. "Ms. Robinson? This is Investigator Hale. We received a complaint alleging possible elder coercion related to testamentary execution. You are requested for voluntary interview tomorrow morning at 9. "Tomorrow morning? Same time block as our authentication hearing prep." Eleanor stepped in. "Counsel here. Direct all contact through me." The investigator gave procedural politeness and ended the call. No charges, no certainty, just another lever. For a second the room felt airless. I could hear traffic outside, a siren somewhere distant, the hum of Elena's overhead lights. Daniel broke the silence. "What's our path?" Elena answered without hesitation. "We file emergency motion tonight to compel Pike live testimony, challenge affidavit foundation, preserve right to adverse inference on wipe devices, and request court prioritize authenticity hearing before any ancillary allegations. We also move to bifurcate and keep probate from being hijacked by speculative criminal claims." "Can we win that?" I asked. She held my gaze. "We can fight it. Winning depends on whether the judge wants truth fast or peace fast." At 8:11 p.m. we filed. At 9:02 the clerk posted next day docket adjustment. Robinson matter advanced. Evidentiary authentication hearing at 8:30 a.m. Oral argument on motions in limine to follow immediately. No breathing room. I stepped outside Elena's building into cold night air and leaned against the brick wall. Across the street, courthouse windows were dark except one lit office on the 3rd floor. I watched that light and thought about my mother writing, "Do not trade truth for peace," not knowing how expensive that instruction would become. Daniel came out beside me. "You ready?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded. "Me neither." We stood there in silence until Elena opened the door and called us back in to finalize witness order. When I turned, my phone lit with a final notification. Sloane had posted a photo of herself at church, hands clasped, captioned, "Truth needs no performance." Tomorrow, a judge would decide what counted as truth, and for the first time since this began, I could not predict the outcome. I could not predict the outcome. At 8:07 a.m., I stood in line at courthouse security behind a man carrying a tackle box and a woman with a toddler on her hip, both of them here for lives that had nothing to do with mine. The metal detector beeped once at my belt, and the deputy waved me through on the second pass. "3rd floor," he said. "Probate overflow is already full." Of course it was. By the time I reached Department 4, every bench seat was taken. Veterans Auxiliary women, 2 museum board members, cousins who hadn't spoken to me in weeks, 3 local reporters pretending they were there for public process. Sloane sat at counsel table in cream and navy, spine straight, hands folded over a legal pad she wasn't writing on. Her fiancé, Graham, sat one row back, jaw tight, phone face down in both palms. Daniel stood near the rear wall in a dark suit, no uniform, No insignia. He caught my eye and nodded once. Ready as we'll ever be. The clerk called our matter, and everyone rose. Elena opened with our emergency request to authenticate the army packet and admit it as controlling testamentary evidence. Sloane's city attorney pushed back fast, contested witness, alleged coercion, chain integrity, unproven in live testimony. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at counsel. We are not relitigating internet commentary. We are litigating admissibility. Call your first witness. Captain Leah Ellis appeared remotely on the courtroom monitor from a legal office at Fort Bragg. Hair pulled tight, service uniform immaculate. State your assignment and role in the documents marked Petitioners 41 through 63, Elena said. I am a judge advocate, U.S. Army Legal Assistance Division. I personally supervised intake and execution of those documents with Margaret Robinson on June 14th, 8 months before her death. She identified each page by control number, seal identifier, and vault transfer log. Calm, specific, unshakable. Sloane's attorney stood for cross. Captain Ellis, you'd agree military legal channels are not typical for civilian wills. They are available to eligible clients, Ellis said. Ms. Robinson qualified. And you had prior familiarity with Miss Riley Robinson's military background? I had no prior relationship with Miss Riley Robinson, yet the release trigger named her specifically, as requested by the client, in writing. He tried to imply command influence, document substitution, procedural shortcuts. Ellis answered every question in the same measured tone. No, and here is the regulation section if you need it. When he sat, his confidence had dropped 2 notches. Next came Harlan Pike in person, shoulders broad, retirement haircut grown thin. He had been steel once. Today he looked like a man trying to stand in 2 stories at the same time. Eleanor walked him through his original witness signature in the packet. Yes, that was his. Yes, he was present. He was. Yes, he signed after review. Then she held up his new affidavit. You submitted this 3 days ago, correct? Yes. In paragraph 6, you state you may have signed without independent verification. What changed? He shifted in the chair. Time passed. Memories imperfect. Eleanor nodded as if she expected that. Mr. Pike, do you remember texting Miss Riley Robinson after Margaret Robinson's funeral? He frowned. I don't recall. Eleanor moved to admit Exhibit 72, a screenshot I had preserved months ago and almost forgotten. On the screen, his number, his words. Your mom was clear. Don't let anyone rewrite this. I witnessed it myself. Pike looked at it and went pale. Sloane's attorney objected. Foundation, authenticity. Eleanor produced carrier certification and metadata chain from my phone backup. Objection overruled. Mr. Pike, Eleanor said quietly, did anyone contact you before you signed your recent affidavit? Long pause. Yes? Who? He swallowed. A man from Ms. Sloane Robinson's legal team, then Ms. Robinson herself. In what terms? He stared at his hands. She said this had gotten out of hand, said if I softened certainty we could avoid public damage to her mother's reputation. His voice roughened. She said Riley was trying to burn everything down. Sloane made a small, involuntary sound at counsel table. Half scoff, half breath. Eleanor didn't press theatrics. She didn't need to. By 10:14, the judge admitted the army packet for purposes of the probate merits hearing and unsealed its core execution records into the active evidentiary file. The room shifted. You could feel it physically, like pressure dropping before a storm breaks. Sloane's lawyer requested a recess. Denied. Proceed, the judge said. We are trying this today. Eleanor called me next. I took the oath and sat with both feet flat, hands still. This was the chair Sloane had wanted me in for months. Under lights, under eyes, forced to speak while she defined me. I breathed once and chose my own pace. Eleanor started with hospice timeline. I identified medication logs, overnight care sheets, and appointment records. Then she moved to the line that mattered. Ms. Robinson, did you abandon your mother? No. Were you her primary caregiver in the period referenced by the filed will? Yes. Daily. Did your mother ever tell you she intended to disinherit you for abandonment? No. She told me the opposite. Eleanor handed me my mother's sworn statement from the army packet. Do you recognize this? Yes. How? It's my mother's handwriting and signature, and it aligns with every care record I kept. On cross, Sloane's attorney smiled like we were colleagues in a polite disagreement. Ms. Robinson, you're highly organized, yes? Yes. Meticulous. Procedural. Yes. Isn't it true those traits can become controlling under emotional stress? No. You drafted discovery motions yourself while grieving your mother. Yes. Would you agree that's unusual? I would agree it was necessary. He tilted his head. Or strategic. I met his eyes. Truth is usually both. A few people in the gallery shifted. No one laughed. He tried me for bias, for motive, for hidden military authority. I answered each question directly and gave him nothing to dramatize. By the time I stepped down, I could feel Sloane watching me with a focus she hadn't used since we were children, and I beat her at something she thought belonged to her. This wasn't over. But for the first time, it was happening on evidence, not rumour. After lunch, Eleanor called the forensic examiner from the Special Masters team, Dr. Naveen Arora. Soft voice, brutal competence. He testified that although Sloane's desktop had been securely wiped after service of our amended filings, estate document artifacts were recovered from her synced laptop and cloud cache, partial draft text, autosave fragments, and print spool remnants. Date of draft creation? Elena asked. 3 days after Margaret Robinson's recorded time of death, Aurora said. A murmur rolled through the gallery before the clerk called for silence. Could that date be system error? Possible in theory. We validated against network time and concurrent user activity. In my opinion, highly unlikely. He displayed side-by-side comparisons, clauses in Sloane's filed will matching the recovered draft, including the phrase, voluntarily abandoned filial duties, typo and all. Print spool logs tied to Sloane's home printer serial, timestamp gap where manual clock adjustment occurred 40 minutes before printing. Sloane's attorney attacked hard. Doctor, you cannot prove my client authored that text. Correct. I can prove it was created on her authenticated device profile. You cannot prove she forged a signature. I am not a handwriting examiner. He smiled, sensing daylight. Then Eleanor called the handwriting examiner. Dr. Lucinda Perez testified to pressure variance, tremor inconsistency, pen lifts, and unnatural stroke hesitation in the filed will's signature compared to known contemporaneous signatures from medical forms. Her conclusion: high probability of simulation. Again, not theatrical. Methodical. Sloane took the stand in her own defense. She cried at exactly the right moments, then hardened exactly when needed. She claimed Mom had changed her mind privately, claimed she drafted language at Mom's direction, claimed the post-death file was a memorial rewrite for clarity, never intended for filing, claimed Pike misunderstood, Ellis was rigid, I was vindictive, and the entire case was my attempt to compensate for years of absence and regret. Then Eleanor asked one question that changed the room. Ms. Robinson, if your mother's true wish was sole control by you, why did you offer Ms. Riley Robinson a settlement returning pre-approved sentimental items in exchange for total silence and waiver of claims? Sloane blinked. Because I wanted peace. Eleanor held up the email. Line 12 reads, sign the release and this ends now. Hours later, items listed in your mother's sentimental memorandum went missing from inventory. Did you authorize their removal? No. Who had access to the home that evening? I don't know. Your own security log lists your code used at 7:48 p.m. Sloane's mouth tightened. I checked on the property. Did you open Margaret Robinson's cedar chest that night? No. Eleanor displayed the anonymous photo I'd received with embedded metadata and geolocation from inside the garage. Would you like to reconsider? For the first time, Sloane's composure cracked. Not tears, anger. This is insane, she snapped. You're making me the villain because I was the one who stayed and handled things while she played soldier and disappeared. I stood before I meant to. Eleanor touched my sleeve, but I was already speaking. Your Honour, I said, voice steady. I need one request on record. The judge looked at me. State it. No private settlement discussions, no sealed compromise. I am asking this court for formal findings, full sanctions, and referral for criminal review if you determine forgery occurred. Sloane twisted toward me. You self-righteous... Ms. Robinson, the judge warned. Sloane laughed once, sharp. You think this makes you noble? You want to watch me burn? I met her eyes across counsel tables. Years of choreography finally gone. I want the record corrected, I said. For Mom. Daniel testified next, briefly, as Elena had structured. No classified details, no heroics. He identified his service relationship to me, my command-level planning responsibilities, and the non-disclosure constraints that made my public resume appear thin. Did Ms. Riley Robinson do nothing for years, as implied in materials circulated by Ms. Sloane Robinson? Elena asked. No, Daniel said. She served in roles where silence was required and precision was non-negotiable. On cross, Sloane's attorney tried to paint him as compromised fiancé with loyalty bias. Daniel didn't flinch. My loyalty is to facts under oath, he said. At 5:31 p.m., after closing arguments, the judge read ruling from the bench. The filed will submitted by Sloane. Void for fraud. The Army certified will admitted as valid testamentary instrument. Sloane. Removed from any fiduciary role immediately. Orders. Restitution of removed assets, return of all estate property, fees and costs assessed, adverse inference entered on evidence spoliation, and referral to District Attorney for review of forgery, perjury, and interference with witnesses. The judge looked directly at Sloane for the last line. Grief does not license fabrication. Family conflict does not excuse fraud. Sloane stood frozen, lips parted as if language had finally failed her. Behind her I heard Graham stand, heard the bench creak. He walked to counsel table, set an engagement ring box beside her legal pad, and said in a low voice that still carried, "You used all of us." Then he walked out without looking back. Sloane didn't chase him. She stared at the ring box like it belonged to someone else's story. When we stepped into the hallway, sound hit like weather. Reporters surged. Phones rose. Someone called my name from 3 directions. Eleanor put her hand up and said, "No comment beyond court filings." We kept moving. At the elevator bank, Investigator Hale from the district office waited with a folder under his arm. He nodded to Eleanor first, then me. "Ms. Robinson, we'll coordinate through counsel for follow-up. For today." He paused, looking almost humanly tired. "I'm sorry for how this unfolded publicly." I gave him the smallest nod. "Thank you." Downstairs, the late light had gone amber. Daniel and I stood beside the courthouse steps while Eleanor took a call from her office. For the first time in months, no one was actively talking over me, reframing me, defining me in real time. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollowed out and shaking. Daniel saw it immediately. "You need water." "I need my mother," I said before I could stop myself. His face softened in that unguarded way he rarely showed outside private rooms. "I know." The neutral administrator met us at the house at dusk with 2 deputies and a clipboard for formal transfer. Procedure even now, especially now. The front door opened on air that smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. My shoes found the same scuff marks in the hallway they'd known since middle school. In the living room, furniture sat wrong by inches, like someone had staged familiarity from memory. The administrator read inventory items. I initialed each return. Bronze star case, recovered. Lockbox of service letters, recovered from attic storage. Hospice journals, recovered from detached garage cabinet. I took the journals in both hands. The cardboard was new, but inside were the original spiral notebooks with my mother's bent handwriting and dates in red ink. I pressed one to my chest and closed my eyes. Upstairs, in my mother's room, the bed was stripped bare. No blankets, no pills, no water glass. Just an imprint in the carpet where the hospital rail had stood. I sat on the edge of the mattress and let the quiet settle around me. Court had corrected the record, but it had not brought her back, had not returned the months I spent doubting whether truth could survive performance. Daniel stood in the doorway. "Elena says orders already posted," he said softly. "Digital copies too." "Permanent?" "Permanent." I nodded. My hands were still trembling. I kept thinking if I could just hold long enough, maybe it would turn, but I didn't realize how much of me was braced for losing anyway. He came in and sat beside me, shoulders touching. "You didn't lose." he said. No, I whispered. I endured. That felt closer to true. My phone buzzed once, a message from a church friend who had crossed the street to avoid me weeks earlier. I read the ruling. I'm sorry I believed her. I set the phone face down on the bed and did not answer. Not yet. That night we ate takeout at my mother's kitchen table from cartons balanced on old placemats she'd bought in 1998. We were both exhausted, past appetite. Rain ticked against the window over the sink. Daniel set his fork down first. I need to say something before we collapse, he said. I looked up. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled, eyes red with fatigue. Okay. He took a breath that didn't quite steady him. I'm not relieved from inquiry yet. It could clear in a week or drag for months, I don't know. I figured. I need you to hear the rest. He leaned forward, forearms on the table. If they decide I exercise bad judgment by filing that declaration, they can stall me out. Promotion board, command track, all of it. Guilt moved through me, immediate and familiar. Dan! He lifted a hand. No, don't apologize for me telling the truth. Not after today. I went quiet. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. I have spent a lot of years being the reliable one. Clean file, correct posture, predictable decisions, useful to everyone. And I told myself that was integrity. He gave a small, humourless smile. Sometimes it was fear with good tailoring. I felt my throat tighten. He continued, voice lower. When this started, I thought my job was to stand beside you and not interfere. Then your sister turned your silence into evidence, and I realized standing aside was just another way of abandoning someone I loved. The word landed between us. Loved. Plain. Unarmoured. I know we're engaged, he said, and now he laughed once, soft and wrecked. I know that should already be obvious, but I need to say this without ceremony. I love you. Not the version people project, not the competent machine who can outplan chaos. You. The woman who catalogued her mother's pain meds at 3 a.m. and still remembered to refill the bird feeder because your mom liked cardinals at breakfast. You who shakes after court and keeps going anyway. I was crying before I realized it. He reached for me across the table. If you decide this is too much collateral, if you want distance until my inquiry clears, I'll give it. But I am not walking away preemptively to make this neater. I wiped my face with my sleeve and tried for steady. You think I want neat? A corner of his mouth lifted. No, I think you want honest. I do. I stood, moved around the table and sat on the chair beside him, knees touching his. Then, here's honest. I've been waiting for the moment you regret choosing me in public. Every hearing, every headline, every time your phone rang from command, I thought, this is it. This is where he decides loving me is operationally unsound. His eyes closed briefly at that. I hate that I thought it, I said. But humiliation teaches you to expect abandonment, even from good people. He nodded once. I know. I don't need rescuing, I said. I needed witness, and you gave me that when it cost you. He swallowed hard. Always. I took his face in both hands, felt the stubble and the tension he'd carried for months. I love you too. Not because you stood in a courtroom for me. Because when everything got ugly, you didn't ask me to be smaller, so people would be comfortable. He leaned into my palms like he'd been holding himself upright by discipline alone. I don't want a gala wedding, I said. No donor tables, no performative family unity. I want vows with people who told the truth when it was expensive. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You're proposing operational parameters. I am. Accepted. I kissed him then, slow and tired and certain. Not the kiss of a victory lap, the kiss of two people who had seen each other at the worst angles and stayed. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. One more thing, he said quietly. When this is over, not just legally over, I want us to host dinner at Officers' Hall. I blinked. The same hall? The same one. His mouth curved. No speeches, no campaign launch. Just people we choose. I pictured the chandelier, the regimental flags, the place where I learned in public what erasure felt like. Then I pictured walking in without flinching. Okay, I said. Same hall. He smiled, and this time it reached all the way to his eyes. Later, when we were turning off lights room by room, he stopped in the hallway and held out his hand. "Come on," he said. "Where?" "Back porch." We stood under the awning in the rain smell, shoulder to shoulder, watching water bead on the herb planters my mother used to overwater. Daniel squeezed my hand. "Whatever they decide about my career," he said, "I'm done letting institutions define the full measure of my life." I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Good. I'm done letting family define mine." The porch light hummed above us. Somewhere in the dark, a cardinal made one sharp call before settling for the night. 3 months later, I sat at a long table in the Veterans Resource Centre with Elena on my left and Marisol on my right, signing incorporation papers for the Margaret Robinson Caregiver Grant. "Purpose line okay?" Elena asked, sliding the document toward me. I read it aloud anyway because words matter more when witnessed. Financial support for daughters and primary caregivers of veterans who pause careers for end-of-life care and are thereby disadvantaged in employment, housing, or legal standing. Marisol dabbed at her eyes with a napkin and pretended she wasn't. "Your mum would have liked the practical part," she said. "Not just scholarships, legal aid too." "She loved practical," I said, and signed. Across town that same week, District Court posted charging documents under seal, then unsealed summary counts, forgery and filing false instrument, pending further proceedings. Sloane's counsel issued a statement about vigorously contesting allegations. She moved out of the house she and Graham had renovated for wedding photos that never happened. The last thing I heard from a source I didn't ask for was that Graham had returned every engagement gift and resigned from 2 museum committees for personal reasons. At church, Pastor Glenn asked if we could talk after service. We stood in the same vestibule where he had once warned me about perception. "I was wrong," he said simply. I nodded. "Yes." He accepted that without defence. It was the first honest exchange we'd ever had. At home, restoration was slower than paperwork. I repainted the front bedroom myself, finding old nail holes and filling each one. Daniel repaired the loose banister my mother used to grip on bad days. We rehung photographs in a different order. Less curated, more true. One frame held my mother laughing with no makeup and oxygen tubing visible, because legacy isn't only formal portraits. The night of the officers' hall dinner, I stood under the same chandelier where Sloane had toasted my failure. The room looked smaller now, or maybe I did. No quartet, no press wall, 30 people, max. Eleanor in navy, finally relaxed, Marisol in a bright scarf, Captain Ellis on leave, laughing with Daniel near the windows. Even Investigator Hale came for 10 minutes, dropped off a donation envelope for the grant, and left before dessert. Daniel touched the small of my back as we greeted guests. "Still want to run?" he murmured. "Not tonight." When everyone was seated, I rose with a water glass instead of champagne. No one shushed dramatically. No one staged their expression. People simply looked at me and waited. "Thank you for coming," I said. "This room has heard a lot of polished stories. Tonight won't be one of them." A few smiles. I continued. "My mother taught me that care work is work, that records matter, and that peace without truth is just quiet control. The grant we launched this month is in her name. If you want to honour her, fund that." A low ripple of assent moved around the tables. I glanced at Daniel. He lifted his glass. "To Margaret," he said. "To Margaret," the room echoed. Dinner went on with clattering plates and ordinary conversation. No spectacle, no one asking me to perform forgiveness on cue. Near the end of the night, I stepped away from the table and stood by the tall windows facing the dark parade lawn. My reflection in the glass caught for a second. Same face, same scar at my chin, same woman who had once learned to smile while being erased. Only now, when I smiled, I did not disappear inside it. Daniel came to stand beside me, warm hand finding mine without looking. "Every witness," he said softly. I squeezed his fingers. "Every record." Outside, the flag over the lawn shifted once in the night wind and settled.